we're going to do our normal thing, and we're going to pack a whole bunch of information into a really short half an hour. So we're going to do our quick trivia question. We're just going to talk really quickly about kind of what we're seeing weather-wise, just like we were all kind of mentioning. And then what does that mean for diseases? So refresh the disease triangle, and then kind of do a roundtable of what are we seeing and where. Right? When we're talking to guys this time of year for fungicide, guys want to go, well, what are you seeing? Well, what's everybody seeing? What's going on? So we wanted to talk about, we have pictures of what we've seen this year. We have some of the disease forecast maps. We want to talk some corn rootworm, and then the rest of the insects. We're seeing a little bit of a lot of things, guys. I don't know if you'd agree with that. Nothing terribly dramatic, but a lot of differences. Different things. So I have an interesting question. Took me a little bit to look it up yesterday. Which corn and which soybean disease? So there are two answers, Jim. I don't know if you want to have one winner or two. Which corn and which soybean disease respectively produce the most spores? And I can't see the chat, so you guys are going to have to let me know when somebody chimes in.
I'll keep an eye on it.
We've got an answer, and that I think on the surface would have been about everybody's answer. So southern rust and white mold, a couple in the chat that are not correct.
That was my first guess as well. And I'll go ahead and go to the next slide then. According to Rutgers University, I was wrong as well, that corn smut in a single medium-sized gall can produce up to 200 billion spores. Now, when we look at southern rust, each of those pustules can produce hundreds of thousands of spores, and a plant in and of itself can produce millions. That was my first go-to answer as well. But for corn, it is corn smut. And then for white mold, yes. And there's a link when you guys get this slide deck that we'll send out. There's a link here from Crop Protection Network that actually has a video of the mushroom sporulating. They have it in a container, and you can see the kind of cloud that they produce that we wouldn't be able to see in the real world. So thank you for participating, everybody, this morning.
Yeah, we got Pierce Jensen again, as you got the white mold part, and that's good enough for me. So back-to-back winners.
Woo!
Pierce.
Nice job. Thank you for participating. The update for GDU calculations, I used a little bit more centrally located location this morning for Western Iowa. I chose Carroll. And so you can see that we are ahead, right? We do feel warm. We had that cool down this spring where we were sitting a little closer to average. But when we use the MRCC tool that we have linked in our newsletter every week, we can see that we're actually for West Central Iowa really on the top of that average shading that we've seen. So we are quite a bit ahead, and I think we're all feeling that with where we're sitting crop-wise and the amount of fields we're releasing for spraying. And this is important. Like I said, we're going to review our diseases today. The disease triangle, right? We know that there are spores out there for just about everything. We know we've had a little bit of southern wind. Dustin and Jim covered it on the last DAACAT call, but we have our pathogens out there in some way, shape, or form. We know we have hosts, right? We have corn and soybeans every year. What we can kind of, we can tweak, or Mother Nature can tweak for us, is that environment. Are we getting the correct amount of moisture? Are we getting the correct amount of heat? Are we hitting it at the right time? Jim, but for those of you just jumping on, Jim had a little bit of what he called Scooby-Doo fog this morning, where it was sitting right at the level of the mystery machine, getting a lot of leaf wetness. So there are going to be some variations in the amount of pathogen that we see because of that environmental variability. And something that we're seeing a lot of this year is a very kind of drastic line of the haves and have-nots when it comes to rain. So we may see with the area that Jim, Dustin, and I cover, there could be some big differences of what your top pathogen or pest may be because of the differences in that environment. Even though we're all the same state, we're experiencing a bit of a different of a summer. Now, Jim and Dustin, I don't know what your vote is. I experience it in my territory east and west of like Highway 4. Somewhere in between Highway 71 and Highway 4, it changes pretty dramatically on the amount of rain and moisture that we are seeing, the heat. So this was an image that was, I updated it in the newsletter this week to kind of show where we're sitting compared to average. And so this is using data from 1951 to now. You can see that to the west in that Anthem, Hornick, Ida Grove, Danbury kind of area, we're sitting pretty dry. So the pathogens or the pressures that they see are very different than, say, a Boone, where we're sitting at 150% of normal rainfall. So I wanted to just set that stage for you guys as we're talking about these pathogens, of when we're talking who's seeing what you hear in the neighborhood. Just remember that the environment and that the shape of that disease triangle, or if it's even being filled and connected, could be very different. And this is, I thought this was really good. This is just what does that percentage mean? So we say we're 60% of normal rainfall. Well, for the West, that means we're actually 5.6 inches short, starting from April 1. So we can see that there are some parts of the state in central Iowa. That's just that one rain you guys got, right? You're 7 inches ahead. That was just the one day, really. So any comments, Jim and Dustin, on the weather that we're seeing?
No, you covered it well, Nora. I always talk about for the GDUs, so we'd love to have above normal up until this point. And of course, now that we're in the reproductive stages for the most part on corn and soybeans, just as well have it cool off. It looks like we do have that coming after Tuesday or so of next week. But with this moisture, we've also been kind of living on the edge for many of these areas other than central Iowa. But I don't think that's all bad. Our roots, for the most part, have gone down well. We've got good nitrogen availability. We've got good color, good evenness across the board. Good, tassel evenness has been one of the better years that I've seen. So being on the drier side isn't all bad. Obviously, this is the critical stage, and talked about it last week, where 2 weeks ago, where we are at a third of an inch of water use on corn at this pollination and going into blister stage. So this is the critical stage. Light ground can go downhill in a hurry, but as long as we can continue to get a few rains as we go through the key reproductive stages, I think we know we've got a great crop coming.
Well, then I'll show the update that I have for temperatures. There's a lot of talk with the heat. How are we handling those reproductive phases? What does this mean? So far, we're not seeing those hot nights, right? At least when we looked at a centrally located spot for our territory, I looked at Fort Dodge. We saw a couple at the beginning of the month. That was ahead of most of our pollination. We're sitting pretty good. We're going to see what this week brings. We're going to see what this weekend brings. Remember that those fungicides that we're putting on can help slow the respiration rate, help that plant handle some of these hot nights. But for right now, we're experiencing that real heat and oppressiveness during the day. But so far, it's not being recorded at night to have those nights above 70 degrees. So we'll go into our little bit of roundtable for diseases. So I did, for this presentation, use pictures from this year that we have found in our group chats that we've been sharing. What are we finding this year? There's not a lot of gray leaf spot out there. We'll go into our other disease section of what is maybe a lookalike that some people are seeing, but we can see that we do have a low risk for gray leaf spot. It's not something that we're hearing a lot of right now. It likes the high humidity, it likes the high temps, the dew and the fog, but and generally cloudy weather conditions is something that I've always tied to gray leaf spot. So it's something we're always watching for, but not a disease that we're seeing a lot of, at least in West Central Iowa. Jim and Dustin?
Yeah, I've not seen any gray leaf spot. Gotten a lot of pictures, of lookalikes, and we have a lot of bacterial leaf streak. We've had a lot of hail, a lot of wind events, and a lot of rain that, they can have somewhat of a similar look, but gray leaf's going to be in between the veins, more rectangular, not really have the halo, but running into a lot of bacterial leaf streak that's getting misidentified for gray leaf.
Remember, guys, it should be called gray leaf square. It's not a spot. It is very rectangular. It has very straight lines. We'll cover that in the bacterial leaf streaks section. One thing that we are seeing a lot of for, I feel like the highest pressure I've seen in many years is northern corn leaf blight. This is something that we're not seeing huge numbers of in a field, but it is definitely something that is present. It's not terribly hard to find. This is a picture from down by Interstate 80 from a dealer sent me that he was looking in a field. It's around. Noted by its cigar-shaped lesions, generally in the middle of the leaf, right? It's not always on the leaf edge. And again, we'll talk about that and other pathogens of what that might look like. Mild temperatures, prolonged periods of dew. It likes these humid conditions that we're seeing. I think that the next time we get disease risk maps, that high will have moved into the state of Iowa because there's a fair amount of it around. Like I said, pretty easy to find as long as you're getting some moisture.
Yeah, generally the DEKALB germplasm is pretty solid on tolerance to northern corn leaf blight. But like a lot of diseases, just the presence of it doesn't necessarily indicate a problem with that hybrid. It's just what happens from that point on. How rapidly does it spread? How much tissue does it take over? But yeah, I would agree, Nora, probably seen more of this at this point of the season than what we normally are at.
And then for Southern Rust, they did increase the number of counties in the U.S. that they had confirmed Southern Rust. There's now 4 in Missouri that I saw yesterday, and 2 in Mississippi, and 1 in Georgia, along with the counties in Texas. I have sent in some samples that looked very suspicious. They came back negative. They came back as common rust. So this is something, guys, if you see something suspicious, if you're nervous about it, give one of us a call. We can get those samples sent in. You can reach out to the universities. They have processes to test for that, but this is something we have currently not seen and not had confirmed by a lab so far in the state of Iowa, which is great. We are seeing a lot of this common rust. This is a picture that Dustin sent to our group chat a couple weeks ago. A lot of this being found. We can see that darker red color, that really not Cheeto color orange, right? That kind of darker old iron colored of rust. A lot of this in the field, not generally a yield limiting pathogen, but it is something that you can find and explain to your growers.
I would guess the heat this week has probably slowed down common rust, as well as eye spot and some of those other cooler disease.
Yes. Yes. Probably slowing it down a little bit. Tar spot, you can find a couple lesions here and there. I have not found anything super dramatic other than 1 or 2 lesions in a field. If you've found more than that, please let us know. Drop it in the chat. But this is our 70 degrees, 7 hours of leaf wetness, 70% humidity. I think probably the heat this week is also slowing tar spot down. And it's not something that I am thinking is going to explode at this point this week. Goss's wilt. So Dustin already kind of alluded to the amount of wind and hail and rain and big storms. Just the wind. Remember, right at when we started post spraying, there were some big days of dirt flying around. Goss's wilt. We're seeing a lot of this. This can be really confusing and similar to northern corn leaf blight if you're not terribly familiar with the pathogen. If you need help, give one of us a call, but this is generally on those leaf margins. It'll look a little bit more water soaked. It's not as defined as that cigar shape of northern corn leaf blight. Jim is our Goss's wilt leader here in Northwest Iowa. So you've been finding a fair amount of it, correct, in Northwest Iowa?
Yeah, I'd taken this picture a couple days ago, and light hail, like a lot of fields that are showing Goss's at this point. Not unusual to be seeing it here in mid-July. It's just a matter of what it does, and a lot of times what type of tolerances we have in the hybrids. And like Carrie mentioned in the chat, definitely can look like bacterial leaf streak, and as heavy a year as I've seen on bacterial leaf streak. So it can get confused. But Goss's, as you hold it up to the sun too, you're going to see more of those freckles. And again, that the water soaked, usually the water soaked edge is, as you go closer to the stalk, looks like it's running down the leaf.
Yeah, and here's a picture of some bacterial leaf streak. So this is a pathogen that I find is probably my number one that you should be holding up to the sunlight, right? We should be looking for that halo. We should be looking for that shape. This, just like Goss's Wilt, just like everyone's saying, needed an opening in the plant, sandblasting, wind damage, the hail that we saw early. So when you're holding this up, just looking down, it can look very much like gray leaf spot. But when you hold it up, you can see that those margins are not so even. They're not filling in between the leaf veins in that blocky structure. And it really kind of highlights itself, I feel like, when you hold it up. The lesions don't look this big when you're just looking down. But that's one of the ways to easily tell bacterial leaf streak, is that it really is that highlighter yellow and those wavy margins right through here. A lot of that this year. I'm also seeing a lot of corn smut to my east, just so you guys know. It doesn't necessarily need to wait for the silks to show up to infect a plant. So these are some fields that had some wind and hail damage. The corn set in early, developed some of those galls, those growths in those opening areas. And there can be hybrid differences. It's not something that we are rating on in breeding, but as you're walking across a field, if you have a split field, if you're in a plot, there could be hybrid differences, and you see that pressure go up and down throughout the field. Generally not a yield limiting pathogen, just something that you may see, especially I'm seeing more of these kind of leaf tumors, I'll call. I don't think they're a true gall, but the kind of tumors more this year than I have seen probably ever before. A lot of pictures sent of what is this, and I believe that it is corn smut. So that's our update of what we've seen. You guys can report back kind of what's going on in the state. Jim, do you want to hit the corn fungicide timing?
Yeah, I mean, we are right in the thick of it, as we all well know. But just as a refresher, because the question has come up, last year, we obviously had a lot of late disease with southern rust and tar spot, and we had a fair amount of late fungicide sprays, R3, even R4, and some were even questioning, R5 as we're starting to pull a dent. And we could see yield response from those late applications. But on average, and this is really with a lot of years of data, not just in Iowa, but even in the eastern corn belt where they've seen heavy tar spot and just heavier disease in general than us, they still have settled on more consistent yield response from that VT to R1 timing. And of course, we've talked about helping out our residual by getting some of the higher rates on Delaro Complete, the 10 or 12 ounce rates, really to help guard against those late infestations of southern rust or tar spot. But that's just a key point. And we want to be on the front side, just like that point at the bottom there. Fungicides are most profitable when applied before the disease steals yield. Once we're seeing disease, we've already got the infection. We've already got the potential for that disease to really take off. So we want to be on the front side. Go ahead, Nora. And then same thing on the soybeans. There is a little more flexibility there. R3, when we're starting to really get to that pod formation, we've got 3/16 of an inch pod at one of the top 4 nodes officially. But R3 to R4, we talk about white mold, obviously, those earlier applications. I mean, I like an Endura at R1 and followed by a Delaro Complete at R3, ideally. If we aren't doing that R1 application, we can still help ourselves on white mold as well as other diseases at that R3 or R4 timing. And then the other question as far as fungicide spraying comes up somewhat every year, but especially this year when we're getting into the peak timing and we've got some extreme heat going on. Really, personally, I'm not too concerned about this. If we're into that scenario where we're, drought, 100-degree temperature, low humidity, we do lose some of the effectiveness of fungicides. It's not necessarily anything that's a risk on the corn side, but we just don't get as much uptake. And so if we're in some of those extreme situations, and I'm talking what they tend to see in the western corn belt and dry land of Kansas, Colorado, you would just be better to wait and get a little turnaround in temperatures. But with what we're dealing with now, I would not hesitate at all. I don't think we're at any sort of extreme scenario. We see plenty of acres sprayed in the south that deal with heat all the time. On the soybeans, I will say, we have seen this phytotoxicity reaction. We can see the picture on the right. You look at that on the surface, you might think, oh, that is SDS symptoms, but sometimes it is just a reaction to the fungicide. Usually not a yield limiting factor, but something that we can expect to see if we're spraying in that 95, 100 degree temperatures on soybeans. And the other factor that comes up as far as on the fungicide spraying time is looking at pHs. And there does seem to be some different things tossed around in the countryside. Some will say, oh, we've got to have that pH down to 5.0. It's really not necessarily the case. You can see some of the ranges. We do see some reduction in activity if we're getting up to that more alkaline 7.5 or above. But if you look at our fungicides in general, and especially the three modes of action that DELARO Complete delivers, if we're in that 5.0 to 6.5 or even 7.0, we're really right at the window that we want to be on pH. So I wanted to bring that up because I know it's been talked about, and there's certain products out there that some people might be pushing to try to get down to that 5.0. But as long as we're not on the too high alkaline side, should be fine just as far as our overall activity with fungicide families. And then it mentioned white mold, but a little too early to tell. I have not seen any myself, but I wanted to mention it because I would say compared to most years, we do have a little earlier canopy on soybeans. Which is generally a good thing, obviously, for weed control. But knowing that we've got that shading effect, we've got a little higher humidity down in that canopy. The heat right now is working against the apothecia and the sporulation of white mold. So hopefully that'll help, kind of like what we saw last year. But knowing we're going to get some cooler weather and knowing we've got the canopy, it's something we're going to need to keep an eye on. And again, those fields that have had history, we're able to spray a DELARO Complete at that R3, R4 timing. We're going to be able to help ourselves out there.
Great, thanks, Jim. We're gonna talk a little bit about insects. There's a lot going on in the world, insect-wise. So, real quick, I just wanted to update everyone that adult corn rootworm beetles have begun to emerge, some places en masse. This is a picture that I got yesterday in eastern Calhoun County, western Webster County. I was right kind of on the border. There are 4 adult beetles in this bit of silk. This is actually a rotated field. You can see the amount of feeding. You can see some of the regrowth that we're getting from our roots. And I just want to call to attention that it is, if you are thinking of doing sticky traps for any of your growers, now is probably the time to start putting some traps out there. The threshold for beetles, if it's going back to corn for or in our extended diapause situations, in 2 years going back to corn, 2 beetles per day per trap. If you're looking at silk clipping, a beetle or less, some of the thresholds are 0.75 beetles per plant, or silks are clipped less than 1/2 inch. And then we're going to want, if we're looking for beetle bombing to target egg laying, we're going to want to hit when those beetles are gravid, which means you squeeze them and you get eggs out. Kind of a gross process there. Anybody else's notes on corn rootworm though? Quick. I'm seeing some pretty heavy pressure.
Yeah. Seems like we're having a little more pressure this year than we've had in the last year or two in fields, rotated fields and corn on corn.
And I think that this is something, guys, you just want to keep in the back of your head. It won't be terribly long, and we're going to be asking for that forecast plan. We're going to be working through that this winter to talk about 2028 and what we should be producing. So just keep in the back of your mind, if you're seeing these fields, they have higher pressure, potential extra extended diapause. It won't be terribly long, and we're going to be thinking about how much trait do we need for 2028. Same avenue, how much trait are we going to need in the future? Western bean cutworm. We have been seeing egg masses, Moorhead, Ida Grove, Willie, which is near Carroll, Atlantic. I really like this picture. It was in the newsletter this year to show how those bars behind their head are not there in those very small larval stages. And these suckers are small when they first hatch, about the size of a pollen grain. It can be super hard to see them, but I'd look at the pollen grains first, then they'll move into the silks and then into the ear. And one way to tell this between corn earworm is that there can be multiple Western bean cutworm on a plant. You have about a 5 to 7 day window to actually spray for these once eggs have hatched. But the best way the easiest management we're going to have is by using our Tricepta or VT4 Pro products in these areas that have Western bean cutworm pressure. The overwintering geographic area has increased by 235% since 1999, and they're now found as far away as Nova Scotia. So when guys go, oh, they're not here, that's just a Nebraska problem. We're past that, guys. It's something we all should be looking for and just keeping an eye on as we go through the season. And here is just the tips. We're going to be inspecting the upper leaves. The action threshold, 5 to 8% of the plants with egg masses or small larvae. The pheromone traps are not as reliable for this pest as they are for pests such as cutworm or rootworm beetles. So they exist. You may hear of trap counts, but it's more of telling you when to scout. It's not really giving you an actual action to complete. Any comments, guys, on Western bean cutworm? We're coming close on time, but I think
not a fun one to scout for because of the fact you got to be up in the top of the plant. So this time of the year, that's not the ideal way to spend your time. That's where the traits come in.
Dustin, you've had some comments on Japanese beetle?
There has been a few, very limited, but we've seen a few over east. I know there's actually been a couple fields. It takes a lot, especially in the vegetative stage of defoliation, to warrant a treatment. But as we get into reproductive stages, then we're going to be a little bit less defoliation. But there has been some around. It seems to keep moving farther north over the years. It seemed like it was always maybe central Iowa, southern Iowa over the years that we've had to deal with Japanese beetles. But we've seen a few more in northern Iowa over the last couple years. So something to keep an eye out, especially defoliation on soybeans. And then if you have them out in cornfields, they are an aggressive silk feeder as well. So we need to watch that for silk clipping. Spider mites, probably not as big a concern in most of my area as you get down to the southwest in those couple pockets that went a month without rain up until a couple weeks ago, and now a little bit on the drier side. I know, Nora, these are pictures that you've seen last week of some spider mites moving into the area. So just another pest to keep an eye on if we stay dry and as warm as we are today.
Right. And guys, when you're out, my Western guys got this in the newsletter this week. When you're looking for spider mites, be looking in those lower leaves. This is something that we're going to want to take some time to really kind of turn over, lean all the way down, look under the leaves for that webbing as we're making those insecticide choices, making sure we're not getting a flare up by killing all the beneficials. It's just something we want you to keep your eye on and just have in the back of your mind when you're doing your pre-spray scouting. Jim, you want to cover aphids?
Yeah, so got a picture from McLean Todd earlier this week in southern Clay County. So some of the first aphids that I've seen as far as a picture. So appreciate Mac for taking that. And, we always deal with aphids, just a matter of how heavy. They do like a little bit of that cooler temperature. So this week, probably not a high week for reproduction for soybean aphids. ISU thresholds This has been the same threshold for a lot of years, 250 per plant on at least 80% of the plants. South Dakota State usually will say you see them, you spray them. So somewhere in between there, but the difference versus a few years ago is we do have wide scale pyrethroid resistance. So that's where Leverage 360 comes in. It's got that imidacloprid as a second mode of action and does provide very good residual, especially if we're spraying on this earlier side, in this R3 and R4 window. But probably a thing that yet to come as far as the heavier infestations on aphids.
A lot of a little pest. That's what we're a lot of little bits. Dustin, you want to round us out with our product of the week?
So Spotlight product of the week, 112.03 new Smart Stacks Pro. Our lead product at 112 will still be 112.35. Bringing this in to take a look at it. More of a Western fit as you look at its disease ratings. Good on gases, good on gray leaf. But the one thing you're going to watch out here, it does have a 5 on Southern Rust, but the one good thing it does bring in as well, it's really good on tar spot. So just another product to look at, a little more of a Western fit, really good yield potential, probably a little bit more of a flexier ear as we compare this to 112.35, where you're going to have to keep the pops up on 112.35 to really get it to yield. You're going to be able to have more moderate populations on 112.03.
Well, perfect. Guys, we kept you 2 minutes over. I appreciate all your attention this morning. Make sure to get your CCA credit. For those of you that have your CCA, open that app. Be safe out there this week. Stay hydrated. We want to make sure that everyone gets home safe at night. But stay cool, stay calm, stay hydrated. I cannot say it enough. Stay hydrated. Like Gatorades, guys. This is what it's made for. So thanks, everybody, and just give any of us a call if you need anything.
Now, Dustin Thomas put some nice pictures in the chat. Get a chance to take a look at those. Just some differences seen in the field, and really a lot of things go back to roots. And sometimes when you've got some looser soils this year, cases where it didn't root as well. But that's why the shovel's needed. You have to be able to scout, check it out. Drone can tell you a lot, but still have to be able to ground truth it with actually going into the field, which this time of the year it's a little challenging. So I followed Nora's guidelines on staying hydrated. But thanks, Dustin, for putting that in the chat. Thanks again, everyone, for being on.
Take care.